So I'm going to be going over how I got the answers to each of these problems. You already have the key, so I just figured if there was one that you were stuck on, you didn't understand what I was doing, you could fast forward to that problem and see what I have to explain that problem. So the first one, actually the first two, these are both vertical angles. Vertical angles mean that the angles across from each other are going to be equal to each other, or congruent. So this first one, I know that 2x plus 6 has to be equal to 96. So if I want to solve for x, I am going to set them equal to each other and just solve it. So I'm going to subtract 6 to the other side to get 2x equals 90, then divide by 2 to get x equals 45. So that was just simple two-step equation, which we did a lot of in pre-algebra and algebra. Number two, doing pretty much the same thing. I have two vertical angles, so I'm going to set them equal to each other. So 3x, if it lets me write, plus 20 is going to be equal to 10x minus 15. Whenever I have equations like this where I have two variables on both sides, I always pick the smallest variable to avoid negatives. So I'm going to move my 3x over. It is positive, so I'm going to subtract it over here to get 20 equals 7x minus 15. And then it's just a normal two-step equation like number one was. So I'm going to add 15 to the other side to get 35 equals 7x, and then divide by 7 to get x equals 5. If on these problems they went further and said, okay, then now what are the angle measurements, you just plug it back in. So let's say that they wanted to know the angle measurement for number 2, you plug in 10 times 5 minus 15. So I just picked this one. You could have also picked the 3x plus 20. 10 times 5 is 50, minus 15 would give you 35. So that tells me that both angles would be 35 degrees. If it went even further and said, okay, so now that you know that, what's the angle over here that we don't know? I know that if I look at these two angles, they make a supplementary angle, which is 180. And so 180 minus 35 would give you this one. So 180 minus 35 is 145. So that means these angles would be 145. So just a little bit more just in case if something like that is asked. So once you find the x, you can plug it back in to see the angles. And then if they ask for the angle that has nothing written by it, just subtract it from 180. For the number 3 question I put on here, I really don't know what to expect with his types of questions with planes, and I don't remember what you said about how to write the answers, so I'm not sure how much number 3 is going to really help you. So identify two angles that are adjacent just means two angles that are next to each other. So I put angle SPQ, so this angle right here, is adjacent to angle TPQ. So TPQ is right here. They're right by each other and they're connecting, which makes them adjacent. Part B, collinear, so angles that would give you a line. So it'd be the same ones because if I take these two angles and put it together, they give me a straight line. So we could put the same angles down. And again, I don't know how he likes you to write that, so look at your notes for these, probably more than the questions I'm giving you, because they're going to help you more than this, I think. What is the name of the plane? That's just a little variable that's all by itself, so plane M. I don't know if a question like that would happen, but I know that there's some questions when you came here after school about what that meant. It's just what the plane is called. Okay. 4, 5, and 6, we're going to focus on the midpoint. So I'm going to write the midpoint formula. You add your x's together, divide by 2. And you add your y's together, and divide by 2. A way to remember that is kind of like when you find the mean, you add up your numbers and divide by how many numbers you have. So you add your x's, divide by 2 because you had 2 x's. Add your y's, divide by 2 because you had 2 y's. So I'm going to plug these numbers in. This first one's my x1, this is my y1, this is my x2, and my y2. And that's just because that's my first coordinate, that's my second coordinate. So I have negative 4 plus 5 over 2, and 4 plus negative 1 over 2. I think with these, probably the biggest mistake that would happen is issues with negatives. So just take your time, be very careful with your negatives. Negative 4 plus 5 is 1. 4 plus negative 1 is 3. And I believe you guys were saying that you can leave it as improper fractions. So the midpoint is 1/2 and 3 over 2. 3 over 2 could also be 1.5. Number 5, add your x's, so 2 plus 1, divide by 2. Add your y's, 4 plus negative 3, divide by 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. 4 plus negative 3 is 1. So that's our answer. Number 6, add your x's. 5 plus negative 4. Add your y's. 2 plus negative 3. 5 plus negative 4 is 1. And 2 plus negative 3 is negative 1. So there's your midpoint. So that one, again, just be very careful with your negatives. And remember what the formula is. 7 through 10, I just remember seeing these types of questions on homework a little earlier in the year, so I figured I'd put them on here. It says we want to find the other endpoint if we're given one endpoint in the midpoint. So what I'm going to do is say, okay, I'm going to call this my x1 and my y1, and I'm going to plug those in. So I know my x1 is negative 1, but I don't know my x2, so I'm going to put plus x over 2. I know my y1 is 9, but I don't know my other y. So all I did was I plugged in what I do know, and I left an x and a y there for me to figure out later. And I know that it has to equal negative 9 and negative 10. So I know that this x needs to be equal to negative 9. So I'm going to set those equal to each other and solve it. So negative 1 plus x over 2 equals negative 9. Remember from my class, fractions suck, so we get rid of them first. So instead of dividing by 2, I'm going to multiply by 2 to get negative 1 plus x equals negative 18. Then add 1 to the other side to get x equals negative 17. Now I need to figure out my y value, so I'm going to take what I have for my y and put it equal to my y. So that would be 9 plus y over 2 is equal to negative 10. Get rid of the fraction first by multiplying. So we get 9 plus y equals negative 20. Subtract 9 to get y equals negative 29. So your other endpoint would be what you got for your x, negative 17, what you got for your y, negative 29. For number 8, we're going to do the same thing. So I know one of my x's is 5, but I don't know my other x. I know one of my y's is 2, but I don't know my other y. And I know it's going to equal negative 10, negative 2. So I'm going to put my x's equal to each other. So 5 plus x equals negative 10. Oh, sorry, I forgot that part. Multiply by 2 to get rid of the fraction. So 5 plus x equals negative 20. Subtract 5 to get x equals negative 25. And then I'm going to set my y's equal to each other. So 2 plus y over 2 is equal to negative 2. Get rid of 2 first by multiplying. 2 plus y equals negative 4. Then subtract 2 to get y equals negative 6. So the other endpoint would be negative 25, negative 26. Or negative 25, negative 6, I think I said 26. Okay, number 9, doing the same thing. I know my x, but I don't know my other x. I know my first y, but don't know my second y. So I'm going to put my x's equal to each other. Negative 9 plus x over 2 equals 10. Get rid of the fraction first by multiplying by 2 to get negative 9 plus x equals 20. Add the 9 to the other side to get x equals 29. Do the same thing with the y, so 7 plus y over 2 equals negative 3. Multiply the 2 over to get 7 plus y equals negative 6. Subtract 7 to get y equals negative 13. So your point would be 29, negative 13. And then number 10, I know my first x, but don't know my second x. I know my first y, but don't know my second y. So put your x's equal to each other. 2 plus x over 2 equals 5. Multiply the 2 over to get 2 plus x equals 10. Subtract 2 to get x equals 8. Then put your y's equal to each other. 5 plus y over 2 equals 1. Multiply by 2 to get 5 plus y equals 2. Then subtract 5 to get y equals negative 3. So your coordinate here is 8, negative 3. I'm going to stop the video here because YouTube is very picky about time limits. So I want to make sure that it doesn't go over the time limit. So this is part 1, and then I'll be also sending you part 2.